Christopher Ciccone is from the North Carolina Museum of Art. Again, thank you for agreeing to do this today. The title of his presentation is When Pushing Pixels Comes to Shoveling, Workflow and Data Management, Implications for Imaging System Upgrades, Involving Large Increases in Resolution. Chris Ciccone is a collections photographer and digital asset manager at the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he has over 12 years of museum digital imaging experience. As part of the Visual Resources Department, he is responsible for imaging objects in the NCMA's permanent collection for both publication and for the NCMA's conservation department. He's also responsible for establishing workflows, training, governance, and evaluation of the museum's digital asset management system. Prior to working in the cultural heritage space, Christopher has had experience in a wide range of commercial photography environments. He is also the chair of the Digital Imaging Special Interest Groups of the Museum Computer Network and is a member of the American Institute for Conservation's Digital Imaging Working Group. He regularly teaches workshops for artists wishing to document their own work and maintains a sporadic practice of fine art photography. Well, Chris, thank you again so much for presenting to us today. I'm going to hand you the floor, and I assume Carson will swap out the presentation.
Sorry about that. Again, as Peter said, my name is Christopher Ciccone, and I am collections photographer and a digital asset manager at the North Carolina Museum of Art here in Raleigh. And I thank Digital Transitions Heritage for inviting me to this roundtable, and also for all of the really useful and helpful material they provided for those of us in the cultural heritage space during this strange past year or so. And I hope everyone present is in good health and looking forward to a graceful emergence from the weirdness that this last year has been. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about workflow changes and ramifications from our recent adoption of a much bigger imaging system in resolution size than we had before. And I realize that all museums are different, and ours will differ from others in significant ways. But I hope that some of what I'm talking about will be generally useful to the people in this space. So first of all, I'd like to include a land acknowledgement on behalf of the NCMA. American Indians have lived in Wake County and the House Creek area in which the museum park is located for thousands of years. To date, no archaeological work has been done to identify specific sites associated with American Indian use of this land, but it's likely that such places exist. As a result of population displacement caused by colonialism, several groups of Siouan and Iroquoian ancestry have ties to the museum park property. Contemporary North Carolina American Indian tribes that live in and have traveled throughout North Carolina include Cherokee, Coari, Haliwa Sapani, Lumbee, Meherrin, Occaneechi, Sapani, and Waccamaw Siouan. Okay, at the NCMA, we have a broad collection that encompasses classical European and contemporary art and objects, as well as objects from Egyptian, Roman, Greek, African, and Mesoamerican cultures. We also have a significant collection of some ceremonial Judaica, much of it is sterling silver, and a notable collection of Rodin sculptures. The museum was first opened to the public in 1956 in downtown Raleigh after decades of work by the North Carolina Art Society to establish a state art museum, which culminated in the gift of $1 million by Robert Humber, the gentleman on the left there looking at our Giotto altarpiece. So in 1947, he gave $1 million with the stipulation that the state authorize a matching amount of money to be used to secure a building and a staff. So we thus became the first art museum in the US that was funded with state money. And to this day, the Admission to the permanent collection is free. And the public mission of our museum is something that's very, very important to me and that I take very seriously. So the museum moved from its original location downtown to its current location in the early 80s. It's now housed in 2 buildings on a 164-acre campus, which also features an amphitheater for live musical performances, an outdoor movie screen, walking and biking trails through restored prairie and wooded landscapes. And the museum park houses a collection of commissioned artwork as well, which really, really makes this unique, I think, in the museum space. So I'm going to be talking about my experience with a large step up in camera sensor size and some of the workflow and data ramifications that have resulted. As I said before, I'll mention a couple of ways in which our department isn't really like imaging departments in museums and archives. I mean, a lot of other ones. First, we don't really have a high throughput operation. We have a relatively small collection and not a lot of material that necessitates a rapid capture workflow. There's only 2 photographers in our department. There's head photographer Karen Malinowski and myself, and we have the luxury of taking the time we need to address a variety of object shooting scenarios. But this arrangement, it can also, as in our case, lead to shortcuts born out of ease and institutional memory, as opposed to actively applying best practices that might be required with a larger and higher throughput staff. So our workflows could be somewhat ad hoc at times. So this is going to be a story about how the adoption of a major camera system upgrade was largely a catalyst for us to improve our workflows and protocols. Another way we're in an unusual situation is the way that our organization is structured with regard to the state of North Carolina, which funds the care and maintenance of the collection and most staff salaries, but provides very little of our programming costs. So in addition to state funding, we are supported on the programming side by a nonprofit museum foundation, which has its own employees. And I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but let's just say that there's a lot of arcane rules about state assets, including technical systems and in what ways they can be conjoined with non-state components. So this makes IT and network connectivity and data storage very, very interesting at times. So this is the first digital camera in use at the NCMA in all of its 3.4 megapixel swivel housing glory. When I started working at the NCMA in the early aughts, we were still photographing the collection on 4x5 transparency film, as well as editorial and promotional materials on 35 millimeter and medium format. The digital age dawned for me when my boss's boss decided that it was time to get going with digital. And to be fair, it was time. And she ordered of us a couple of these newfangled things without really asking us what we, the photographers, might find useful in this regard. We had fun playing with it, but it didn't really lend itself to anything that we could use for publication or serious work. But shortly thereafter, we acquired our first DSLRs, a couple of Nikon D100s, and these and later D200s were used to document events and editorial work, but not collection objects. This also marked the dawning of the tiniest bit of awareness on our part that something that we would come to be known as digital asset management would be a major part of our workflow soon enough. So I mention this because increases in technological capacity were at first very incrementally affecting what we did. That's largely because we were just dipping our feet into the digital world, and our IT time our IT team rather at the time had built a pretty good server data infrastructure. But by the time we made the transition to an all digital workflow, including collection materials in about 2009, we had enough digital experience to create an organizational structure for our collections output with what we thought was decades of storage capacity. Our first digital collections camera was a 30 megapixel leaf back on a Mamiya body. And as I mentioned, whatever upgrades we'd managed to scrap for had been modest increases in file size and resolution, which brings us to our latest upgrade, which is the Phase 1 IQ4 150, which we got because we wanted to get ahead of the resolution arms race and have a system that would provide more than enough resolution for all of our constituents. Plus, we really wanted to get going with more expansive collection access and things like, for example, IIIF compatibility. I mean, we knew it was going to involve bigger files, of course, but we'd handle it. So when we get the camera and we start shooting with it, the first thing we shot was this painting by Jan Levens. And it's one of the major works of our collection. It was one that was due for digitization after some conservation treatment. One of the first things we noticed was that focus plane alignment or misalignment issues were going to be really, really critical with this, at this resolution and this large sensor. So, but the increase in resolution is really stunning. This is a quite large painting, and the image on the right is a 100% detail from just a single frame capture of this painting. So the next situation we tested was focus stacking because we knew that at this resolution that the depth of field issues would be really critical. So we were a little trepidatious about running such huge files through our focus stacking software, but it handled it pretty well. And I think this image was put together, the image on the left, this Cellini sculpture was put together from a 6 or 7 image stack. We haven't thrown dozens of images in a stack at it yet, but we'll see. But there was a problem emerging. So when we started really generating output with this camera, it became apparent that storage and access was going to be something that had to be addressed in a systematic and predictive way and not an ad hoc. We need more server space pretty soon, so can you add a shared partition way that we've been doing up until now? But this opportunity dovetailed pretty nicely, though, with anticipated changes to our digital asset management system that we'd been talking about for a while. So we took the opportunity to look at all of our systems and end users and revise our workflows to incorporate more formal protocols that we develop and assess with our institutional clients and quote unquote vendors, namely IT and conservation and the curatorial staff. So with IT, we had been on premise for all of our storage, largely just out of inertia. Previous IT staff that were at the museum were very wary of cloud, anything off premise, and the current IT staff that was employed by the foundation, they were raring to go with cloud storage because it freed them up from a lot of maintenance issues. But as I was mentioning, the state apparatus, there were a lot of hurdles to get through to talk them into authorizing the the storage of state assets essentially on third-party cloud management systems. So we also took the opportunity to revise all of our backup schemas for all our various networked and local computers. With conservators, with the new and the curators, we took this opportunity that when we were looking at our workflows, that let's make things more transparent and involved so that everybody understands what's going on. We came up with some standardized vocabularies for what views we would call and what different states what different states of, say, conservation we would use for nomenclature, and deploy that in metadata so that it could be easily sorted and classified. So we also one outcome of this was that we were able to establish some timeline expectations with these end users. We were able to show that what was involved with, say, doing RTI or focus stacking, and we were able to generate some respect for our time and expertise in a way that, I mean, I think to some degree that conservators and the curators saw photography as like this sort of automated pushing a button thing, and I think that we were able to generate a good amount of understanding about what goes into the product, and how best to utilize our new tools, including this new camera. We couldn't shoot everything on this. It wasn't practical. For example, we're not going to be doing copy work with this camera. So what would be our quality standards for various object classifications? So we were able to come up with workflows that everyone understood and respected. And many of the changes were about establishing standards or changing practices that were less than optimal. For example, file naming, we finally got around to not relying on the file name for object data, for example. And some of the changes were just taking advantage of new capabilities. For example, Capture One has many features that gave us tools for automating some object metadata tasks. This is a summary of changes that were facilitated with our IT staff and the ways our data structures look differently as a result of migrating to a cloud-based system. Previously, when it was all on-premise, everything was stored locally. The way that our dams was built, we couldn't do versioning within the dams. So if we wanted to say have a separate an asset with separate resolutions for, say, web or a different color space, we'd have to generate and then store in the dams all of those. And the dam server was on-premise as well as the image server. So that led to a bunch of version control issues. We had a pretty ad hoc folder structure for storing stuff that, again, was sort of a legacy of slowly adopting digital asset management as a concept, and we had tons of manual data input that offered a lot of chances for incongruities of metadata. So now we just keep one 8-bit sRGB TIFF file. It's called the publication file in our dams for collection objects, and all the derivatives that are generated from that we keep in 16-bit uncropped master file with object level targets stored locally. We have a lot of non-collection images that we keep as max quality JPEGs in the dams, and they're migrated out automatically with a placeholder in the dams when they're sunsetted, so they can still be seen, but they're not stored. We're not paying for storage for that. And for now, we're keeping raw images indexed and stored locally. I know there's a lot of back and forth discussion about whether that's good practice or not, but that's what we're doing for now. So this is how we decided to divvy up the workload between our imaging systems. And we've established assessment timelines for all of the new standards and practices. So we basically upgraded our practices as a partial result of upgrading our imaging system. And as in all things museum, it's an iterative process that isn't ever really finished, but it's really satisfying to see a big increase in terms of both image quality and workflow effectiveness. So basically we're using the big camera for all of our collection objects and all of our conservation photography. The full frame DSLRs we're using for photogrammetry, RTI, deaccessioned objects, proposed acquisitions that get presented to the acquisitions committee of the board. We just shoot with, we don't make a big deal about that, because if we acquire them, then they're going to get the full Monty. And for conservators, we shoot outgoing loan condition photos right as the objects are being ready to travel. If you're wondering what happened to that cool pics, did we save it and put it on eBay? That's it, sitting in a box. Our chief our chief curator said that he wanted to make he had a project and he wanted to make a time capsule. So he asked for objects, and I thought that this was a very suitable thing to put in our NCMA time capsule. And this box got placed into this base last year. That's our objects conservator, Corey Riley. And that cool pics with a bunch of other museum ephemera now resides in the base of this statue by William Wetmore Story. And I think that's pretty cool. It's pretty great. So thanks. I'd like to thank some NCMA colleagues, in particular our beloved paintings conservator Noello Khan, who passed away unexpectedly during lockdown, and it was made even more shocking and sort of terrible because we couldn't really get together to grieve in the moment. And she was very instrumental in working out a lot of our conservation workflow standards, and she's very much missed. I love talking about cultural heritage imaging, so you can reach me at the email address there, and that's my Twitter handle, and I guess I'll take questions then. Thank you.
Thank you for that great presentation. We should be getting some questions popping up soon. So, Chris, if you don't mind, do you want me to read the question first before you answer it, or do you want to read it?
Well, I see it here. It's a question from Irina.
Yeah.
And on data storage, any experience with recovery sites and replication backup technologies? Like multiple sites or say Amazon Glacier. I can't really speak to that because that's IT purview, and I couldn't answer sensibly. But if you want to email me, I'd be happy to query our IT people and find out. Again, it's complicated because we have this weird bicameral system where we're partially administered by the state, but partially administered by the foundation IT. So, but Okay, Brian wants to know, how did we achieve, oh, I'm sorry, I'm like running ahead of myself. Okay, sorry, Sarah, you're asking which focus stacking software we're using. We are using Helicon Focus, and well, we were using the Helicon Remote, but now that we have the phase one, that we let Capture One control our sequencing, and for a while we've been comparing which did a better job, and it's even, so it's basically a preference of whoever's shooting. And how did we achieve planarity with the IQ 150 and the artwork? When it was, well, we just were able to see, like, it was an issue that we hadn't really thought about, and then we were able to see, like, whoa, okay, at this resolution you can really see that we're losing, we're losing focus in this corner or that corner. And so we've tried a couple things. We've tried like the laser and the mirror trick. It's complicated because we have a lot of old paintings that are warped, and so there isn't a single plane in which you need to achieve parallel. So it's an adoption, but it's just something we have to work at and really make sure we have locked down before we commit to the output. Okay. Okay. How are we doing on time, by the way?
You're doing great.
Okay. Okay, so I'm sorry if these are going out of order, but I see David says, do we save the layered focus stacked file? If so, why? We save along with because we've been saving the NEFs and the IQ files locally. We save our stacks, and I don't know that I can fully justify why, other than we're paranoid and don't want to. And if it has to be redone, we'd rather restack than to bring the object in and reshoot. But that may or may not change. So yes, we do save the stack files and index them. Okay. Okay. So any thoughts about using JPEG 2000 in your DAMs rather than the 8-bit TIFFs? Again, that's an area where there's been a ton of back and forth, and it's just easier. It's not, that's one where our solution is just one of primarily inertia and wanting to avoid getting into the technical details of one over the other, and so I don't know as much about JPEG 2000 format as would make me comfortable to adopt it. Okay, Scott asks, are we using a flat field lens, and if so, is that usable for dimensional objects? I don't know. We're using a Schneider Kreuznock 80 and a 120 macro, and I don't know if those are flat field lenses. Maybe one of the DT people can tell us, but we use it on dimensional objects. We use it for both. We do apply the standard lens corrections in Capture One, the canned profiles, but we rarely, like, it's not like if you're shooting with a Nikon and you're using a 24mm lens and you throw it into Lightroom or ACR and you apply the profile and you see that it really does a lot of correction. There's not a lot of visible correction happening with either of the lenses we're using for the artwork.
Chris, I might be able to jump in a little bit on the
Sure.
lens thing. The 80 millimeter blue ring lens was not really intended to be designed as a classic flat field lens, like something like a process lens that the IXH system has. That's really designed from the ground up to be a flat field lens. However, the 80 millimeters is quite decent. The focus plane is pretty flat on that lens relatively, as well as the 120, but it was not its intentional design. It's designed a little bit more to have, beautiful bouquet and just, render three-dimensional objects in a very appealing manner. But it does actually a pretty respectable job as a copy lens.
We've been very satisfied with it for our 2D artwork. It's really been quite good.
Mm-hmm.
Antonio asks, how do we preserve our raw files? We do not convert them to DNG just because we are preferring Capture One as our raw processor, and I'm not particularly worried about the the continuity of proprietary files in this instance. So we just keep them as they are. So we keep them as IQ files and as NEF files. We don't convert to DNG. Okay, Aiden is asking if there are any anecdotes about how I navigated building relationships with your end users to better understand your process in the studio. I would say that everybody was really receptive and actually very, very appreciative to be included in the collaboration. When I started here, I think photography the imaging department was like this mysterious place where the end products just emanated from, and that was our field of expertise. But when we, particularly with the conservators and the curators, when we got with them and said, hey, look, this is what we can do, but this is what it takes to do that, and how would you prefer us to what would be the standard treatment for this class of object or this kind of object, and are there any salient differences? We invited everybody's come to the studio and watched us shoot, so that's been interesting. And so I just find that in the museum space particularly, people are very willing and appreciative of including them, being made to feel included in your workflow if your workflow incorporates anyone else's workflow in any sense. Okay, Mary is asking what dams we're using. We're currently using Extensis portfolio, and we have completed an RFP process to migrate to a different platform, and I would prefer not to publicly talk about that, but right now the effective dams we're using is portfolio by Extensis. Is there anything that I missed? Okay. Good side topic on this is malware and how to recover, and I'm assuming you're talking about off-premises data storage. The details of that and the details of responsibility for security and backup for our off-premises stuff, I can't comment intelligently on that. Again, that's our IT, both state and foundation, that would would have the relevant information about that.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I'll just throw it out there. You manage the visual resources, correct? Does that include all departments inside the institution, like the curatorial files, as well as the conservation department, as well as the photographic department? Or does each unit seem to kind of self-manage their visual resources?
Well, that's a great question, and that's another one that is now in flux as a result of reassessing our systems. And like many places, I think we're going to a more integrated, like centralized authority system for all of our imagery. So conservation does a little tiny bit of their own imagery. They do their own X-rays. They do some intermediate process photography. They have a small studio in their department. So they have kept their output. So we do their overall views and their condition photos. We have access to that, but we don't have access to the stuff they've done. And we're talking about moving that into the responsibility, co-responsibility for that into the digital asset management realm, as far as just their siloed realm. Same thing for a number of other departments, frankly. So we deal with a lot of non-collection image assets, publication photos, event photos, historical images. Education, our education department is one that has a lot of photographic needs, and we contract out. And so we control, so when somebody wants to hire a photographer for an external event or for something that we don't shoot, we handle the hiring and the contract, and then the ingestion of their output into the QC and the ingestion of their output into our dams. Okay, yeah. So, and also videos is something we're getting into too. We now have a full-time video person, and we're really at the early stages of learning how to integrate that into our dams and make that content available and accessible to everybody, and how to categorize it and what to do with it. So yeah, that is part of they're part of the visual resources department as well. So
no, that's just great. Thanks for that. I know that's always a complex question for large institutions. Well, at this point, I think it's time for us to move on to our next presentation. Christopher, thank you so much. That was really great, very insightful, and
thanks.
Hats off to you.
Thanks, I appreciate it.